want to start by echoing them and just thanking Jacqueline Hall and the conference organizers for inviting me to participate in this panel. This is really a great honor for me personally, and a real treat to be with so many friends and dear colleagues in the audience. And this is a really important panel. I think that in many ways it dovetails from the discussions we had this morning about historical memory and Black Power. I actually teach a course, I was going to say UC Santa Cruz now at the University of Florida, but I also taught at the University of Florida on African American and Latino histories. And I started teaching this course because, when I finished at Duke in 2000, I taught the course one time here at Duke because my students were telling me, we don't live in a biracial paradigm. We don't live in a biracial world. There was this incredible demographic shift happening in North Carolina in 2000. And when I moved to California, to Santa Cruz, many of my students are from Oakland, they're from Richmond, they're from Sacramento, they're from Los Angeles. And they're telling me the same things. We don't live in a biracial world. We live in a multiracial world. And the Latino students were trying to learn African American history, and African American students are trying to learn Latino histories because they're living in the same neighborhoods. They're going to the same schools. And many of them would come to class and they would say, we had there was a fight at the school. It really wasn't between blacks and Latinos, but the local newspaper or television station thought it would make good press to come out and claim that it was a black-Latino conflict, because that's what the media loves to do. They love to pit us against each other. And so that was one of the reasons that led to the teaching of this course. And actually, one of my favorite posters of all time, Will had it up there, the one with Malcolm and Randolph and Hedgeman, the Negro and Puerto Rican Communities Unite behind Alumni 99. I would bring that poster out to my classes every time and show them that. And I think one of my students stole it for me, actually. It's such a cool poster. You think about what Malcolm said that day, it's really amazing. And I think Dr. King was actually going to speak at that event, but he was taken away by another event, if I'm not mistaken. But if you look at African American Latino histories, there's so many amazing intersections. We don't have time. We wouldn't even have time if we spent a whole conference on it. I mean, one example that Z's work brings to mind is Frederick Douglass, his opposition to the Mexican-American War. And he came out very openly and said, look, y'all, you know what this war is about? It's about slavery. There are so many African Americans finding sanctuary in Mexico because Mexico had the progressive politics to abolish slavery, and there is an underground railroad that goes directly into Mexico in the 1840s and 1850s. And he said that's what this war is all about. And of course he said it in Ireland because he himself had to leave the country temporarily because of threats to his life. But Jones's and Vargas's scholarship is indispensable to understanding the breadth and depth of 20th century civil rights, labor, and human rights movements. And I'd like to talk about some of the larger analytical points that underlie their work. I also want to get them talking to each other because I think there's a lot of very important conversations that could occur. And just a few things, a few points that I think that underlie their work, their attention to political economy and the larger structural forces that ordinary people must negotiate in their daily lives, such as the labor market, racism, the business cycle. Up until recently, we were told there are no more business cycles, right? Well, now we know we still have business cycles. Racial oppression. It's interesting if you think of Milton Friedman, Capitalism and Freedom, 1962, the basis of the Reagan Revolution, in which he insists that economics is a science. There's no politics, no political considerations in economics. Vargas and Jones, however, reintegrate the political struggles of the protagonists with the economic contours of the broader society. And this is really a much needed corrective to the scholarship. Too much of the scholarship ignores basic economic questions. Yet, as Darlene Clark Hine notes, quote, the white supremacists' major goal, after all, was to maintain a pliable, exploitable labor force that would remain permanently in a subordinate place. And this is one of the many connections between African American and Latino histories. When we talk about land and labor, the dispossession in the American Southwest of so many Mexican Americans, the dispossession of African American farmers in the 19th and 20th centuries. Secondly, both Vargas and Jones display in the research a careful and nuanced approach to the working class. In these scholars' research, working class people think and even theorize about profound social and economic issues. Too often, civil rights scholars continue to erase or overlook working class people from their narratives. They see them as kind of foot soldiers, as people who show up to marches. They don't really see them as active theorists. Vargas and Jones insist that they belong at the center of the story. These are gritty, dramatic, triumphant, and ultimately tragic histories that mirror the best of recent American literature, a point I hope to return to a bit later. In a related sense, Vargas and Jones demonstrate that there is no movement without working people at the center of the mobilization. And this is true whether we talk about labor, protest, consumption, or other venues of activism. For example, it is impossible to imagine the Chicano student movement of the 1960s without understanding its rootedness in early United Farm Worker struggles. So as we move forward this weekend, we must keep these 3 points at the center of our efforts as we continue to reconceptualize the movement. And I think what this conference is already telling us is we really need to reconceptualize what we mean when we say the movement or the movements.